Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Tarot. Today we are entering into a new realm with our tarot card decks, the realm of the second septenary. This is the 8th card of our Major Arcana series, also known as Justice. So as usual, we will be looking at the name, the number and the symbolism and meaning of this card. So if you haven't already, go and make yourself a cup of tea, light a candle and settle down as we explore Justice. Welcome back, guys. So there is only one reason why I am dressed as if I'm about to have my day in court, and that's because we are doing the Justice card, and there was only one other way I could take that, and that was by having a set of scales and a sword. And my scales are digital, and my sword is in the back of the cupboard. So I've decided to dress as a defendant. Go with it, accept it, and let's carry on. So we are doing Justice today. There is a note that I want to say before we actually kind of go on to the card. That is for those people that are using a Rider-Waite-Smith or a variety that is based on Rider-Waite-Smith. The numbering's different. Your 8th card will not be Justice. It will probably be Strength. Some other modern decks have also reordered. I will show you. So, here's the Rider-Waite-Smith. The 8th is Strength. The 11th is Justice. That is just switched around from the Marseille. So in the Marseille, the 8th is Justice and the 11th is Strength. The reason why this was done was because the card ordering as it was did not reflect the correspondences and the teachings of the Golden Dawn, so they saw it easier just to switch the cards around to kind of reflect those Kabbalistic principles and those correspondences and make it work a little bit more perfect. As I said in a previous video, the tarot doesn't really work in perfect ways. There is no full sets, the numbering doesn't always line up, and this was kind of the Golden Dawn's way of trying to correct some of that numbering. I have decided to do the 8th card as Justice as in the Marseille because there's a lot of stuff about why this, justifying why this change was made, and you can find it all over the internet. The justification of the number 8 with Justice is less out there, and it's not really done, so I wanted to kind of do this numerological pair just to kind of help those people with the Marseille. I will talk a little bit about the number 11, but everything else in this episode is going to be fine. It's going to just be the same card. Justice means exactly the same thing in the Rider-Waite-Smith as it does anywhere else. But the numerology is slightly different in the Rider-Waite-Smith and those decks that are based on it. So the Thoth deck, I know the star is not Zaddy, is the major phrase of Crowley that's often repeated, and the numerology in the deck has been slightly reordered to reflect that. So your deck may not have the ordering exactly as I am doing in these videos, but it still applies. The numerology will be slightly different. Cool? Good. So let us go on with Justice and talk about the name Justice. The name Justice is not the judge. The judge would be a person that shows his judicial law. Justice here in the tarot is about the concept or the principle. So we have a card that only differs slightly by the French having the Justice, which kind of makes it a definitive article or an object or like a fixed thing. You could read into that. I'm not going to for the sake of brevity, but that's the only difference. But both of them are personifications of the principle of justice. They are not people in the role of justice. This is not a lawyer. This is not a judge. This is not a barrister. It is a personification of the idea of justice. With the first septenary of cards, we saw real people in the mundane world in medieval time and culture. So we saw street performers with the magician. We saw the emperors and the empresses with the 3 and 4. We saw the Pope, which are characters, big characters in medieval society that everyone would know and see as people. Here in the second septenary, and if these terms are not making sense, go and check out my introduction to the Major Arcana video. I will put a link there if I remember it. If not, it won't appear there, and I have forgotten about it, but go and find that video and it talks about these septenaries. In the second septenary, we are now talking about principles and ideas that govern society, like the idea of justice, as well as those that kind of are internalized and become our internal mechanisms. So our super ego kind of aspects. So we can internalize the world of justice and apply it to our own lives and have our inner version of justice, but it is also a principle that rules over society. Those 3 septenaries can be seen in different ways. Some of the older French stuff kind of sees the first septenary as spirit, the middle one as soul, so we're now in the world of soul and developing the soul, and the last one as body or developing the body. Sometimes they're switched, so it's body, soul and spirit, but all of that I will cover in more detail at the end of the Major Arcana series, where I will re-look at those patterns in a much detailed way, knowing that we've all kind of covered these cards. So other than that, let's crack on. So justice is the principle or the value of justice that governs society as kind of a rule or a law or a universal law. As well as that internal value. It is not a person. Cool. Let us look at the numerology of the number 8. 8 is a little bit tricky. 8 is the highest even number in numerology. Numerology only goes from 1 to 9. Everything else is a repeating of those numbers on a higher plane or a lower plane. So for example, the 13th card, which is the unnamed arcana, death, that is 1 3. 1 plus 3 is 4, so it's a reiteration of 4 on a higher level. The major arcana, well, let's do 11th strength. 11th strength is 1 plus 2. It's 2 high priestess on a higher plane, so they all resolve back down to those 1 to 9. So with 8 we've got the highest even number in numerology. As such, you can kind of see it as the peak perfection of stability. If you remember, we talked about even numbers being stable, not fixed but stable. So with odd numbers, we had that kind of extra number that was a free radical, that extra kind of being that was kind of a free radical and gave it energy and moving forwardness and action. With even numbers, we've got the stability, we've got all the pips lined up, so there is a stability and passivity about the even numbers. So with 8 we have the highest level of stability, the perfection of stability, almost like the completion of stability. And that perfection of stability in the everyday life or in social constructs like society, we've got justice, we've got the idea of law and order, we've got the perfection of stability, the idea of keeping that stability stable and things moving. Law and order, justice. Cool. The other thing to note is that the 8 has been the 7 and will go on to the 9. There is a progression. We are seeing a snapshot in time. So when I talk about stability, I'm not necessarily saying that it is stagnant and not moving. What I'm saying is that at that point in time, it shows that stability. It will eventually become the unstable 9, and it has come from the unstable and hard work of the 7s. Yeah, so we're always seeing that kind of moving through. So the next bit about the number 8 is the way that it kind of is made up. Let me show you on here. So one way that we can see it is as 2 squares. I don't know why I did a tick there. There you go. 2 squares. So 2 sets of 4. Yeah. So what we see here is, when we remember, if we were talking about the 4, we were talking about the material plane, the physicality, and because we've got 4 elements, if you remember, like this, which makes up the whole of matter and the whole of the physical plane. So here we have 2 mirror perfect versions of the material world. We've kind of almost got a good principle and a bad principle. What's good in the material world and what's bad in the material world? Yeah, we've got this duality, this mirroring, this opposites, and that's the duality, the 2. So because we've got 2 times 4. So here we've got the scales of justice. We've got in one thing the bad things, the pros, the cons, and one thing the good things, the pros, and seeing how they balance out. So we've got this kind of ogdoad of numbers that kind of show its kind of reflection. We've also got the other way of seeing this is we've got 2 of times 4. So 2 is a duality. It's the scales, but it's that continuum of balance that is always fighting but always stable. So we've got the yin and yang, or we've got the good and bad, black and white, positive, negative, that is always battling each other, and they manage to stay stable because of that, always battling each other. So it's kind of like a duality that's fixed. We also have this as conversations, relationships, so the 2s kind of apply here, and then we've got this for the material world, the material plane. So we've got that weighing up of the material plane of material things. So we've got justice in essence. The other thing that we can see with the 8s is the world, the realm of the fixed stars. So if we have Earth here, and if you remember the 7 planets from the last episode, we've got the 7 planets that go out like so. Oh, I'm going wrong because I'm talking too much. There you go. So we've got the 7 planets that line out away from Earth here. The 8th, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 8th here is the zodiac, the spheres of the fixed stars. Fixed stars. So this is what can be referred to as the 8. This is the closest to our God, yes, to divinity. So this is the closest the material plane can be to divinity. So there's an aspect of 8s that's almost like touching divine. It's almost like the highest order of the material plane. It's getting to that universal. It's getting to that divinity by rationality. You know, it's about a universal law of justice and truth and honesty that is touching the divinity, the godliness, the good, the truth. The other way of numbering this is this way. So if you remember, 1 is godly. 1 is godly because 1 is not a number. If you think of where the word number comes from, it's similar to our words of numerous and numeral, which means plural, many. 1 is not plural, many is a unity. It's a monad. So it's not technically a number. It's a unity. It's a oneness. As such, that's God. That's seen as divine. Then all the other numbers are made from it. So 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So everything stems from the divine. Everything rolls out of the divine and comes out of the divine. So here we have 2 being the fixed stars, because we're numbering this way into the world. 3 being Saturn. So 3 was given as kind of the first material number to the slowest planet in the sky. 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. 8 is Mercury. So with Mercury, we are looking at things that are about rationality. We are talking about the intellect. We are talking about mind and thought. We are almost talking about philosophy as well. So that aligns very nicely with justice, the idea of justice, as well as cartomancy, because 8s are sometimes linked to thoughts or the mental world or the thinking world. So and 9 would be the moon. Yep, cool. So 9 being the moon is interesting, but I'll come back to that another time. So that's the other way of looking at it, that 8 can be linked to the fixed stars or to Mercury. The last thing I think on my list is the idea of the days of creation, going back to Christianity. So we had 7 days of creation. So we had 1 through to 6, and then the 7th day God rested because it was hard work. The next day after that would have been the 8th, which is the start of a new cycle. So there is an aspect of 8s that is about new starts, resurrection, and salvation. You know, this kind of death and rebirth cycle. So sometimes 8's linked to deaths and resurrections. And here with justice, we can kind of almost see that as that trial, you know, that going through up to the trial, the decision of the trial, and then being reborn into that decisiveness and changing your life, that transformation between a pre-trial, trial, and after trial. So we see that kind of resurrection almost there. I think that is about all I want to bore you with in terms of numbers. I could go on about 8s all day because they're quite a complex number. But let us quickly have a look at the number 11, which is this one. So the other way that you can see 11 is in 2 ways. So 11 can be 2 because it's 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. It can also be a higher level of 1. Okay, because we've got 10 plus 1. So 10 plus 2, like that, would be a higher level of 2. It would be the second iteration of 2. But here we've got the higher iteration of 1. So 2, we have the High Priestess or the Papess. And with 1, we've got the Magician, or the equivalent. So with these two, the Battalier, these 2 cards are iterated in here somehow. So we can see that Justice is a bit similar to the High Priestess, because of these columns and this veil between it. Waite makes a kind of a reference to this and says that whilst the High Priestess is about those kind of high divine spiritual intuitions that some men are able to have, I'll say his quote in a second because it's quite confusing. Justice's columns open onto a different world, that of kind of worldly justice. His actual phrase is, "It is possible of certain men to conceive the idea of dedication to the highest things," which what I think he means by that is talking about that High Priestess of some men are able to dedicate their lives to the pursuit of spiritual truths, others aren't gifted in such a way, and therefore we kind of have them ruled over by the laws of justice. So they're kind of two varieties. The other allusion is to the Magician, and some talk about how the Magician can be being weighed up in this. Both the Magician and the Justice is active cards in some ways, and I will talk about that in a bit with the symbology. Cool. So I hope that kind of helps, especially if you have Justice numbered 11. That's kind of talked a lot about the number 8, and I hope has made sense because it's quite a lot, and it's quite a lot of different ways of seeing the number 8. So let us look at the imagery of the card and the symbolism behind the card. So we have, looking at the Marseille, we have some interesting things. So the first thing is, this is sometimes different on different cards. This is the Kris Hadar version. As you know, I do the Marseille by Kris Hadar on these videos. Some other Marseilles are slightly different. Some Marseilles have the columns, and you will see that when I go and draw things over the card on my desktop, that it's got pillars, not these wings. There is reference to why they shouldn't be wings, because we have now kind of moved away from kind of divine principles into mundane kind of ruling over society principles, but Kris Hadar has seemed to have jumped away from that and kind of given this wing. But these two, whether they are columns or wings, kind of show the between the pillars of justice, severity and mercy, but also between good and evil. It's the columns that we saw in the High Priestess, the B and the J, ha ha he he, we're seeing once again in this card, and we see that very well in the Rider-Waite deck, where it's really mimicked on purpose. We just see a different kind of cloth. So we've got that. The other thing to see is this sword that is being held very, very straight and up. In some cards it is slightly tilted. Is it in the Rider-Waite? Ever so slightly, but almost imperceptibly so. But sometimes it's tilting ever so slightly, but not something that you will instantly see. And that's kind of almost like justice being given a nod to its human personification in terms of courts of law that aren't eternally just, but because people make mistakes. But here it's perfectly straight. It's kind of showing that justice is a two-edged sword. It's that kind of aspect of being completely fair. We saw a tilted scepter in terms of the Empress. If people remember, the Empress with the tilted scepter kind of showed that her emotions sometimes swayed her judgment, and here we see someone not being swayed by their judgment. We see this very clearly on the Justice's face, which is cold and unexpressionless and stares straight at us. It doesn't look left and it doesn't look right. It doesn't look towards the past. It doesn't look towards the present. It looks at the present now and how she wishes to judge in that moment. In some ways, if she'd looked to either side, it would have given a bias to the past or to the future. And in this way, she draws on both the past and the future to decide her actions in now. Excuse me. So by that, she is looking at the past actions as well as the future ramifications, the cause and the effect of that situation and now. And we see this in the way that she's looking. The cold, kind of flattened look sometimes can be seen as kind of like the archetype of a cold mum or mother, or in the kind of Freudian sense, the castrating mother, but in a kind of less binary position, kind of cold, removed, decisive action that isn't about giving love, but it is about giving justice and fairness. So we see that. We also see this beautiful braided necklace that looks like it kind of stems from her own hair. Some writers link this to the four for the Emperor, where we saw him having a plaited necklace, and said that this is kind of a reference to that 2 times 4, that kind of principle of this being a more spiritual way of ruling over the world or the earth. So that could be a link to there. Some authors have also suggested that this is a solar cross on her chest, where the kind of braid crosses that, and that hints to solar energy. But a more obvious link to solar energy is this symbol on her crown, which looks like the circle and dot of the sun, the radiating, life-giving principle of the sun. And that we can kind of almost see as light and truth. The idea of justice as providing a light in the darkest times, and also a way of her being guided by truth, a divine truth or an idea of truth. Kris Hadar has also painted the crown just above yellow, And he tries to do that sometimes to kind of show that they've kind of got a divine connection, or they've got a link to the divine. So we also see here in the Kris Hadar card, I don't think this is in the historical, but this kind of slight scythe going on here. And that's linking to that 8 as a resurrection and new start kind of principle. The other thing that we do see in Justice is that Justice cheats. So Justice is tipping the scales. You can see her arm is pushing on one side of the scale, and you can see her knee is pushing up on the other side of the scale. This is kind of a hint to Justice not being completely fair and completely just. You can either read this as the human ramifications of justice in amongst us humans, that we will bias one side and we're not brilliant at kind of instituting the ideas of justice, and we tend to kind of favour one or the other based on emotions. Or you can kind of see it as fairness sometimes means manipulating the situation a little bit. I've got an example of this, and it's not going to apply to everyone. So if you are a Dungeons and Dragons gamer or a role-playing person, the DM, the Dungeon Master, or the Game Master, GM, depending on which system you play, will have to make rules and judgments by normally a roll of the dice. So let's say the adventurers are on their merry way up a hill. By adventurers, I mean your other players that are your family, your friends and your loved ones. They are going up a hill. You've decided that at a certain point, rocks are going to fall down the side of the mountain and possibly injure your players. So it's going to be important for them to work together as a team. Unfortunately, the decision of this is rolled by a dice, which is completely fair and justified. It is less influenced by your decisions and your like and your love. It is very much the justice card. So you take your, let's say, d20s and you roll and decide on the answer of that dice. Unfortunately, you have rolled badly, and that means that your poor friends and family's characters are going to be crushed under the weight of a load of rocks, and there is no way they can save against it. They are effectively dead in your game, and you've killed them, and it is your fault. And unfortunately, because you've decided to play fair, those are the rules. Most DMs won't do that. If they roll a particularly high number or low number that may have a huge effect on their players, they will sometimes tilt the scales on one side or the other. Yeah, so instead of killing and maiming all of your characters and therefore having to start a new game, you will edge it down and say that your 1 is actually a 3, and therefore there is a saving throw that will help, and there is a way that your players can kind of get out of that predilection. That's my example. It's not going to apply for everyone, but the idea behind it does. It's the idea that severe justice is less natural than allowing some sort of change, and nature allows that change a little bit. Nature wants someone to be reformed. You know, we are not talking about the death penalty with justice. We are talking about the reforming, that looking to the future and the past, which is why we're looking straight. You know, we are detached, we are being fair, but we also want to be fair on the person that's in front of us. We don't want to kill all of our friends and family off because we've rolled particularly good or particularly bad on a dice roll and ruin the game for everyone. So that is my example of that. It will apply to some of you, and you'll be like, and the rest of you will be like, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. You are a serious nerd. I'm good with that. Carry on. So that is the cheating aspect of justice, with nudging down the scales and pushing up on the other side. The other thing that I did say that I would mention is this little toe popping out, and you will also see this on the Rider-Waite-Smith here. This kind of hints at the Justice is about action. You know, she is sitting, but this foot slightly forward kind of almost looks like she's about to kind of step up and take action. So justice isn't about this lofty domain of justice where it is all about principles and ideas, but it's also about putting the ideas that come from justice into action. So it is no good saying I have done badly at that and I have behaved badly if you are not going to take that lesson and use it in your life. And that is what this foot is a little bit about. It's kind of hinting at that action after it. Yes, we are at pause in the 8. Yes, the 8 is about stability and pause and not action. But it still means that we should be taking that into action when we move into the 9. When we have reflected on it and kind of taken our lessons, they should be reflected in what we do and how. Cool? So those are the main symbols of that card. I'm going to jump over to my favourite bit where I draw over the card deck here. I think my drawing pad has gone on sleep. There you go, I am back. So here is, now I've slightly changed it up for the second septenary. This is still the Madney deck, but this is the father. So this is the 1709 deck rather than the 1734, 1737 deck by the sun. The reason why I've done that is just because the lines are slightly clearer on this, and the other one, which I preferred the colours in, was a little bit murky, so I couldn't quite pick out all the details, such as the very cold edged face and this kind of hair braid that kind of goes round. So I wanted to make sure that you could see what we were talking about. So as you can see, the scythe thing is here. I was wrong, it's kind of there. Yeah. So hidden things, we've got the columns in this card. Yeah, here's the 2 columns here, and we can see that the top half of the card is a square. Yeah, we can go across this line here. It's slightly cheaty, but so we've got that first square. If we look at the way that the justice is sitting, we've also got our second square. Yeah, so we've got the top square and the bottom square. That duality of 2 times 4. And we've got the higher order of matter and the lower order of matter. Base matter, things like greed, jealousy, anger. And we've got the higher order of matter, selflessness, care, charity, those kind of principles. So we've got those two things here. The other thing that I do know in terms of shapes is that if we do see, let me just take that off a little bit. If we do see this top as a square, I'm going to just make that square a little bit bigger. Ooh, I don't know why I can't draw horizontal line. There you go. Like this. Here we go. Yeah, nice blocky square. We've also got a triangle here. We see this line here, and we're just mimicking this triangle here, this shape, and we can then draw up from the foot to here again. Yeah, so we've got this triangle. What is this saying? So triangles, remember we were talking about, it's kind of the vivifying principle. We're talking about spirit, the ideas of spirit, and we've got matter over spirit, matter domineering spirit. So in a way, we're talking about justice on earth, the earthly principle of justice, rather than the idea of divine justice. We're not talking about karma, we are talking about justice in the material world. And that sometimes means referring to precedents and earthly matters, and not necessarily looking at spiritual ideals. So that's kind of where I see that little extra triangle. We also, if we see this square here back, we have spirit in the second sphere, but we also have water in earth. So you can also read that if you are an occultist, because we've got sub-elementals, which are quite fun. So we do have the duality in several areas, don't we? We have the duality of the here in the scales. We also have the duality of the columns. So we've got those 2 times 2, 4 times 2 kind of principles. The other thing that I did want to show you in this is this card is a little bit weird, and it has the reason why the reason why I wanted to do this, because it's very, very clear, is you can see here in the hand there's a certain finger of the middle position that has been extended. It is almost as if Justice is holding her middle finger up at the humans that are looking at her. So that is just beautiful, and I just wanted to point it out for a little bit of fun. But yes, so Justice has a cold look, and she is sticking her middle finger up at all of us. Enough said. So those are the hidden symbols. We've got squares and we've got triangles, which is the main thing in there. We've got the 2 kind of squares, and we've got that kind of hidden triangle on the bottom that kind of hints at spirit being overwhelmed by kind of an earthly law or earthly principles. But it also hints back at that kind of 8 being partly spiritual and partly touching the divine in its kind of rationalization. It is kind of extension out to divinity, being close to godliness. With the Rider-Waite-Smith, we do have very similar kind of looks. We've still got the foot that's pointing out. Some people see this as red, some people see this as purple. I'm not quite sure why the difference. I think it's that kind of, is it a blue and white dress or is it a golden white dress kind of thing? But here in my copy, it's definitely a red. The thing that I do notice is we've got the 2 squares. So we've got one in the clasp of the cloak, and we've got one in the crown. This is supposed to be a personification of the Greek goddess Themis, Themis, who is equated with the idea of justice. There is sometimes a hint that Themis should be blindfolded, and the idea is that justice treats everyone equally and doesn't discriminate between race, gender. Justice for everyone is not unfair, and the reason why this is not blindfolded is that it sees all humanity. It sees exactly where you're coming in and how you're walking in. So that's some of the hints of the symbolism there. The rest of it is pretty much what we've covered. So the hints towards the high priestess with the kind of the draping background behind. Let's see whether I can just quickly drag it up just so that you can kind of appreciate it side by side. There you go. So you can kind of see those links between 11 and 2. The 2 looks like an 11 here. It's quite fun. So yeah, you can kind of see those hints. They both look at us. They are both crowned, but one with a divine crown, one with an earthly crown. The columns are different. This is a columns of a building in kind of society. These are the columns of the first temple. We've got the veil behind that parts this world and the divine behind it. We've got here a kind of a covering that parts this world and that of judgment or eternal judgment or that kind of thing. The hands here are very shrouded and they are hidden. We are holding things back. Here they are very demonstrably out, showing kind of the power and ensuring that it's her will that's kind of carried forth. She is laying all of her cards on the table. She is talking about her judgment. So this is about being silent. This is about talking. Yeah. So we see some of those kind of correspondences in the card between those two. So we are now left to talk about the meaning of this card, and we've kind of hinted at it all the way through. So the Justice card is about fairness. It is about cause and effect, like that, looking back in the past and looking at the future and kind of making a present decision based on the cause and effect. So this could be within society. This could be looking at judgment on your conduct in society, but it could also be internal. It could be taking your internal stock of your past events and then putting it in action in the future. And that's kind of one of the key principles of this, that it really does talk about putting those things in action. Otherwise you are not moving on to the 9. You are stagnating. You're just kind of reflecting for reflecting's sake, which is not what this card is about. It is about putting into action an idea of justice. Justice is not reflection, it is the active principle of applying those decisions into your everyday life. We are also looking at this kind of balance and equilibrium aspect, this weighing up. So this card can kind of come up in terms of judgment or kind of judging related kind of matters. So going to court, making a decision and based on what it is. And if this comes up in terms of fairness and judgment, you will kind of get a fair judgment. It doesn't say that it will be good, it doesn't say that it will be bad, it will be based on your past actions. So sometimes it's a bit tricky to read in a spread when you don't know the other person's past actions. Will I get away with it? Well, it depends on your past actions. What did you do? And it will be fair in respect to that. So it is always looking at that past, and it is always looking at that future, that rehabilitation aspect of justice. The other thing that it can be is kind of looking at law and order and the structure of the universe. Once again, we're kind of looking at this 8 being the peak perfection of stability, this law and order, the structures and the organization. So this card can kind of come up if it's looking at the structures in a workplace, like especially kind of HR, I suppose, which help govern the whole business as a whole. So things that kind of govern and order and create stability for a whole thing is kind of a justice thing. The other thing that justice is kind of also hinting at is kind of almost physics. Those laws and structure of the universe, how our universe works, and it's kind of very linked to Mercury, that kind of thinking, that scientist-y kind of heady kind of energy, and that's very physics. So it could come up in terms of physicists and physics and working things out in kind of like the underlying structure of the universe. So that's what would it be if it was in a love spread? Well, a love spread, it would kind of be if it's about kind of whether this relationship has legs or whether it's going anywhere. It would be more along the lines of what happens will happen completely fairly. It's not saying that it will be good, it will not saying that it will be bad, it will be based on your previous acts. So if there's been issues in the relationship and those issues have been kind of on your side, then it's probably not going to go well, because you need to have justice for those bad actions. This relationship needs to end. That is your judgment. So it is always looking back at the past of what's happened and kind of weighing up what's best in the future and then putting those into action. So that's work. That is love. In business, if this was coming up in terms of business or a business idea, it would be about weighing up and putting in structures into place to kind of get things working. So we are then putting in the brand values, for example, would be justice. What does your brand or your business stand for? What is its key points? What is its key messages that set it apart from the competition, or set it apart in terms of you, or that you can actually hang your hat on? Our company believes in earth-friendly beauty therapy products. That's what you're hanging your hat on. That is the stamp that you are now judging everything you do for that business. So if you are ordering a load of plastic bags, that is not keeping in principle of justice, because you are going against your own ideals and your own principles and your own laws for that business. Does that make sense? So I think that is a little hint of those three areas. As always, I will be writing a very comprehensive handout, or cheat sheet as I call them, for my Patreon supporters on this card. That will include everything I've talked about, plus more, including other ways to interpret it inside different readings. Sometimes I put lots of history and bits like that if you're kind of keen on history, and references to older tarot cards, but those are quite comprehensive and they are available for all of my wonderful Patreon supporters. Thank you so much. So if you would like that, or that seems something that will help you, please go and check out my Patreon. It is the equivalent of buying me a digital cup of coffee as a thank you, and it does go a long way into supporting these. So anyway, that said, that is the Justice card, and talking about the name, the number, the symbolism and the meaning of it. Next card up is the Hermit, the 9th card. I don't have it. Oh, there it is. Hermit, the 9th card. And we will be looking at that in detail, so please stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the video. There'll be a button there, and like, and please comment below anything that you want to see from me or my channel. It's been wonderful having you for this long, and I will now sign off so that you can go and enjoy your tea in peace. Thank you very much. Goodbye.